Hello, design historians, and welcome to this week's lecture about the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was a revolution in the sense that it caused changes in just about every aspect of life. We talked last week about it beginning in the 1700s. Unlike most modern revolutions, it happened over the course of about 200 years. But we call it a revolution because it basically caused major changes in manufacturing, mining, agriculture, transport, but also in the whole economic system, economic policies, and social structures. It began in the United Kingdom and spread throughout Europe, North America, and eventually the world. Its impacts were both positive and negative, as we'll see. And the main result of it for the focus of our course is around the mass production of machinery, tools, textiles, chemicals, and glass, as we will see. Just setting the stage for how the Industrial Revolution happened and what was happening in the world before then, so sort of the causes of it. The Agricultural Revolution was a much slower event, which occurred around the late 1700s. And this was around sort of a series of small shifts in the way that people practiced agriculture. Things like crop rotation, so, planting corn one day and wheat the next, meant that the soil could be used all year round. It was more economical, and the sort of science of revitalising the soil and managing pastures rather than doing what your parents and ancestors had done before, started to happen in the 1700s. You also had in Britain, certainly, landowners buying and then fencing public land and then managing the sort of work on it, which meant that they were interested in doing it in the most cost-efficient way. So this small series of shifts in the way agriculture was carried out meant that smaller farmers were pushed off the land to work as labourers for landowners. And one of the results of it was that more food was produced, which enabled a supply of food to people moving to the city. So you had a system which enabled the production of good quality food, better quality food, more food. We can look at this great leap in populations as being caused in part by this sort of agricultural revolution all throughout Europe. So, for instance, in 1700 there was 100 million people in Europe, and by 1800 the population had grown to 190 million. So doubling every 100 years, which would be unsustainable otherwise. Interestingly, the Industrial Revolution began with the textile industry, which had to that point existed around this system of like a cottage industry. So a number of workers situated around small artisan villages or guilds would work together. Merchants would drop off raw materials and pick up finished products later. So we can look at, in the current system, things like shoemakers, dressmakers, still operating within this system. But what happened was a series of small inventions started to modernise the textile industry. For instance, in 1760, James Hargreaves invented the spinning jenny, which allowed two people to do the work of one person. The spinning jenny actually spun cotton and wool into thread to make fabric. In 1733, John Kay invented the flying shuttle. So if you look at this, the thread was attached to this thing here, which sped from one side of this machine to the other, making fabric. And we can see a weaver and a hand loom. So John Kay's invention allowed sort of a machine to do the work of two or three people. Okay. Another invention which took that idea even further was Edmund Cartwright's water loom, which was the first machine, fully mechanised machine that could weave cloth. And it's called a water loom because it was powered by a mill, by water, going through a water wheel. Similarly, Eli Whitney developed a machine called the cotton gin, which separated cotton seeds from the cotton ball. Another very important invention that revolutionised the textile industry was the invention of the sewing machine. So in 1846, Elias Howe invented the sewing machine. Interestingly, the sewing machine really hasn't changed very much at all. So the contemporary sewing machine that you might buy from Spotlight or whatever works in exactly the same way as this machine. But this machine allowed people to make clothes much faster and with much more accuracy. Before this, all clothes were made literally by hand. So one of the biggest effects of this was the movement from the home to the factory, that people couldn't work at home, they had to actually go to a workplace that was set up. And interestingly, in 1850, 60% of the world's textile production was in Britain. So if we look at this graph in which we see in 1813, there was 2,400 looms, so a loom is the thing that makes fabric, and 150,000 workers, and we see a great 100-fold increase in that in sort of the 37 years to 1850. So it's this massive increase in activity around the textile industry. So we've been talking about the Industrial Revolution beginning in Britain, which is a pretty small country really, but in 1850 Britain was a major world power. Yet it occupies less than 2% of the world's landmass and less than 2% of the population of the world. It also has the world's largest navy. Britain colonised Canada, New Zealand, Australia, India, and Pakistan, and parts of Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Caribbean. So we can look at this cartoon from the 19th century, which is sort of representing Britain's relationship with the rest of the world, I suppose. It's reaching out like an octopus to take goods, materials, and raw materials from all these other countries that it is colonising. Into the 20th century, here's a map of the British Empire in the 1920s, and we can see all of these red countries, nations, states, are occupied by Britain. So Britain is this tiny little country up here, and it's controlling all of these countries, as well as having trade relations with many, many, many other ports and countries. So we have the British Empire expanding in order to control markets and open up free trade. But this was not met without resistance. And we have the late 1800s, the Opium Wars, which was about Britain and the US trying to control the supply of opium from China to India, which resulted in the Treaty of Nanking, that some of you may know this already, and the ceding of Hong Kong to Britain until 15 or so years ago. So by the mid-1800s, Britain had control of most of India, the Indian subcontinent, and they called it the jewel in the British crown until in the 1940s, India gained back its independence. It's interesting to ponder this question of why Britain, why not Germany, why not any number of other countries. The main reasons are that the empire, the sort of expansionist empire, provided all the raw materials as well as the markets. So they took raw materials and made goods in Britain and sold them back. The other reason that Britain was able to take advantage of this is that it was had a long period of peace and a stable government, which is really important. It also had many natural resources actually available in Britain. So large amounts of coal and iron were able to be dug up from the earth. Plus, advances in agriculture, plus the ability to import food from the colonised countries resulted in a healthier, larger population. So this sort of had a follow-on effect with itself. Another of the really major reasons that Britain was able to take advantage of all of this new technology, industrialisation, was that it had terrific geography. So a large river system to create water power and many natural harbours. So it was easy for boats to drop off goods, go back. And in fact, the majority of the industrial activity in England occurred around this central area, from sort of Birmingham up to Manchester, including Liverpool. So it's a really tiny sort of area. So the results of the Industrial Revolution, one of them was, of course, the steam train, meant that journey times were substantially reduced. So you could get goods, materials, people from one end of this industrial area, Birmingham, to London in 11 hours, in 3 hours as opposed to 11 by horse and coach. So this resulted in a speeding up and a shrinking of distances and time. So, as I said, the steam engine, invented in 1763 by James Watt, shifts labour from humans and animals to machines. So previous to this, you had horse-drawn, bullock-drawn vehicles. Now we've got these steam engines. Inventions continue to make life, manufacturing and farming easier and better. And continuous reinvestment of these profits fueled an even greater growth. Plus the fact that inventions in one area, like agriculture, led to inventions in other areas, say textiles or coal production. And you have communication systems greatly enhanced, so it's much easier to communicate with various aspects of production. The significant changes brought about by the Industrial Revolution start to solidify in the middle of the 19th century, where we see cities begin to dominate the Western world, and the creation of a new social order with the rise of a middle class. So previous to that, you had nobility, landowners, royalty, and working class. So we have the rise of this sort of class of landowners, factory owners who are earning money from the activities of the Industrial Revolution. But we also have a real decrease in working conditions for the lower classes, which, as we'll see, eventually leads to social and political movements. And another shift is this constant need for new markets and resources, which forces Europeans, not just Britain, but many European nations, to take over foreign lands in order to control trade, which is called imperialism. So the heroes of this, one of the heroes of this movement was a guy called Islamabad Kingdom Brunel, who was an engineer, an industrialist, a mechanical and civil engineer, who built steamships, railways, and bridges, sort of, further enabling the movement of goods and materials. So guys like Brunel actually worked out how it would work. And we see him here in front of some massive chains which were part of the creation of the Great Western Railway, which ran all the way through Britain. A really important event which sort of crystallised, if you like, the changes that the Industrial Revolution brought about was the Crystal Palace exhibition in 1851. So the building itself was a demonstration of new technology in the use of cast iron and plate glass. And the Crystal Palace was in London, housed the goods of the Industrial Revolution, so all of the things that were being made in Britain, but also all of the things that were being brought into Britain from the colonies. And these were displayed in, see, 4 different views of the Crystal Palace. There were sections, like from different countries, showing off different types of trade, different types of technology. And what we had here was the very beginning of what we now know as the department store. So this was the first department store, Bon Marché, founded in 1852. So this is very much, so this is it now, but it was a way in which goods could be arranged for purchase rather than in little shops down the high street, down a main street. Another significant event in this period was the opening up of Japan to the West in 1860, which influenced all forms of decorative arts, fine art and design. So you have a real influx of sort of Oriental influence coming in this period in the goods that are being produced. It's back to the negative effects of the Industrial Revolution. So the Industrial Revolution caused a great deal of poverty, and the poverty was situated mainly on women, children and the disabled. There was no social systems as we know them in Australia now. So if you were disabled, that was it. You begged on the street. There was no laws governing child labour. You had the exploitation of natural resources, so coal being dug out of the earth, pollution. Certainly in countries like America, the need to produce cotton was one of the driving effects behind the slave trade. But generally unfair colonisation practices and controls. But in terms of design, one of the things that was pointed out was the production of what was called soulless objects. So if we look now at goods being produced before the Industrial Revolution by master craftsmen, by artisans, and then after the Industrial Revolution, goods being produced by machines. This is what people like William Morris were talking about. They were terribly critical of the effects of the Industrial Revolution, not just on the goods produced, but on, we see here in this etching by Gustave Doré, the effects that it was having on people, on the quality of life. Bertrand Russell, another critic of the Industrial Revolution, from his book The Impact of Science on Society, wrote, "Children had to be beaten to keep them from falling asleep while at work. In spite of this, many failed to keep awake and were mutilated or killed. And parents had to submit to this because they themselves were in a desperate plight." So we see children being used a lot in mines because they're small, they could zip up and down narrow places. Here's some children being from mine workers. The poor working conditions included rigid schedules, monotony, dangerous working conditions. So these machines were full of moving parts with no safety, switches or features. 12 to 14-hour days, very poor lighting. So you can imagine that in this period there is no electric lighting, and you're working from sun up until sundown, sometimes beyond that, by candlelight. Okay, so here we have women working at a textile mill, child working in a loom. So their little hands would get caught quite often inside those moving parts. Okay, and we do have this very strong division of the wealth. So you have the wealthy factory owners, industrialists, and the workers. So here we have another cartoon which represents that sort of disparity between the wealthy and the poor, so capital and labour. And we have a number of people criticising this in various ways. So a guy called Thorsten Veblen publishes The Theory of the Leisure Class in 1899, and he talks about the fact that the middle classes develop an insatiable appetite for goods to demonstrate their wealth. So here we see women wearing these crinoline dresses which are designed to show off the fabric. So we can see here that this frame beautifully shows off these gorgeous fabrics which are from India, China, embroidered, fabricated elsewhere, brought into Britain and made into dresses. Okay. Of course, we have cartoons poking fun at the crinoline. Here we have, they weren't actually that wide, but this is somebody poking fun at it. Another cartoon about crinolines. So these were the sort of what women wore around sort of 1860s. I'm using it as a rain thing. Now, design. I talked before about William Morris, and he began the arts and crafts movement as a reaction against the soulless machine-made production of the Industrial Revolution. And he considered the machine to be the root cause of all evils. Okay. Just to know, I mean, these dates, 1880 to 1910 are quite loose. It's very hard to say it began in 1880 and finished in 1910, but these are kind of frames that we use to say it was around this period. So the arts and crafts movement
looked back to the natural qualities of the materials. It was very much in favour of the master craftsman, and it was inspired by British flora and fauna. So many of these people actually set up workshops in rural areas and revived old techniques. So they tried to bring back the techniques of the pre-industrial era. Okay, so there's William Morris, the house that he built, and William Morris was very most well known for a number of things, but one of them was his wallpapers and textiles, which you can see in the back here, which were based on organic forms, as well as Japanese. You can see an influence here of Japanese printmaking. And he said, have nothing in your houses that you do not know to be useful or believe to be beautiful. So he was excuse me, very interested in reviving skills and interested in the integrity of the materials he used. So here we see a house designed by Philip Webb, in which there's almost a sort of Gothic 15th century look to the forms here, but the wood is allowed to appear in its full glory. Another designer from this period, Charles Rennie Mackintosh, architect designer, who looked to the medieval manuscripts for his inspiration. This looks very contemporary. So this is some of the furniture that Rennie Mackintosh designed for William Morris. Okay. Morris also was interested in medieval manuscripts, and he started in the late 1800s the Kelmscott Press, which was a small group of artisan bookmakers who printed and published these beautiful books. Most famously, the Tales of Chaucer, but they also published a number of beautifully illustrated volumes. Okay, wallpaper patterns. So other influential designers, Owen Jones, Frank Lloyd Wright from this period, the early 1900s. So the arts and crafts movement is about a movement away from the sort of hard edge of industrial produced goods towards a sort of a more natural, inspired by, you can see here, Middle Eastern forms. Okay, here's a sheath of wheat. Okay, so the arts and crafts movement was a movement. Okay, but what we can call the first real sort of decorative style of the 20th century was called Art Nouveau. And this really solidified those organic curving decorative elements, and it allowed sort of the old customs, habits and artistic styles to sit alongside new ideas about production and modern life. And Art Nouveau believed that everything should work in harmony to create a total work of art. So we can look at things like this poster for a play, Sarah Bernhardt, where everything, the text, the images, the holes, the way that the forms are framed on this piece of paper works together. Okay, here are some tiles, working together as a whole unit. The Metropolitan in Paris, this was deeply shocking when it was built. But you can see here the use of beautiful organic forms, and the metal which was allowed to corrode to this colour was seen as really ugly by the people who criticised it. And this is plate glass, cast iron. So here we've got demonstrated new techniques that weren't previously possible. So if we look at the Crystal Palace of 1851 as the first consolidation or bringing together of all of the goods of the Industrial Revolution, we can look at the Exposition Universelle in 1900 in Paris as the birth of Art Nouveau as a style. So these are like massive world trade fairs as we know them today. Okay. So another artifact of Art Nouveau is the Sagrada Familia Church in Barcelona, which was commenced in 1883 and is still being built. But here we can see the use of organic forms. Here, a staircase in Brussels. And again, some posters. Right. Aubrey Beardsley was a very well-known illustrator. And again, you can see here the use of Japanese printmaking in his design style, and this really unconventional use of framing of objects. The arrangement of form on the paper is very unlike what had gone before. Okay, Louis Comfort Tiffany. So you see this lamp, this idea replicated, ad nauseum. Again, the staircase. Okay. Now, if you go to UTS Online, underneath course design history, course documents, PowerPoints, and lecture notes, you'll find this timeline, which you can download and print out, which sort of starts you in 1700 through to now, and you can follow some of the key kind of movements and events. Interestingly, next week we're going to be talking in the lecture about Germany, talking about the Bauhaus movement and how that began in Germany. Today I've been talking largely around England, and then in the following week we're going to go to America and talk about how streamlining and modernism took root in America. Okay, so this week you're going to watch a video in the tutorial, and in that video mentions Josiah Wedgwood, okay, which is his company started here. Okay. Now, just a reminder for everybody that the difference between diachronic and synchronic. So the diachronic approach analyzes how your object evolved over time. So we want to see how the thing, the artifact, changes throughout history. Again, I don't want you to go too far back, so don't go back beyond 1850-ish, unless you check with your tutor. And I'd rather that you chose artifacts to focus on for your synchronic analysis that were at least 15 years old. So synchronic, so the first part is the diachronic, how did your object change over time? And the second one is the synchronic, where you analyse that artifact at a given fixed point in time. So you choose that object, what it looked like in, say, 1952, and you analyse what the other objects at that period looked like, that existed with that object. How did that object make sense? Okay. Again, this will be online, but we can see here the evolution of a gaming device, a games controller. Okay. So I want you then to choose one of them, like say this one, and explore what did the TV look like, what did the clothes look like in 1977. Okay, so if you've got any questions, ask your tutor, and thank you very much. I'll see you all next week for the Bauhaus lecture.